Welcome to the Therapist to Millions podcast with Dr. Susan Spicer and Damien Mark-Smith, where we interview all kinds of therapists to see what makes them tick as they share their breakthroughs, their most interesting cases and their biggest challenges, and what's working in the world of mental health today. Hello and welcome to the Therapist to Millions podcast, where we delve into the lives of therapists to find out what makes them tick and also what's succeeding in the world of mental health today. And today we are welcoming to the show Clint Matheny, who is a Doctor of Thinkology. I love this. Clint is a 77-year-old semi-retired psychotherapist who specializes in clean language trauma, PTSD Psychotherapist, and he's also a psychological self-help blogger, and his website is clintmatheny.com, and it's very good, by the way, helping heal anxiety, depression, and other emotions. And he wants to provide therapists additional tools and how-tos to help their clients resolve traumas and not just cope or muddle along. So I'm really looking forward to this call. Clint, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Damon. Nice
My
to be here.
pleasure. Good to have you. So tell us a little bit about, what type of therapy you do. It sounds like you do multiple types, actually, but what type of therapy do you do?
I do. I do a little bit of talk therapy, but very little. I find that, especially dealing with trauma, I don't want my clients to fall into their past trauma, and nor do I want to experience it either. I find that when people get into their emotions, we pick them up too. To understand what a person's talking about, we have to make pictures in our heads. So I like to do non-content therapy. And what I mean is they don't have to tell me their story. All they have to do, let me know, is they want to change something. And most of the time people come to therapy wanting to get rid of something and they don't know what they want. So the first question I always ask is, what would you like to have happen in the therapy session? What do you want? And most of the time I get a blank look. All right. Because we are conditioned as children by our parents and caregivers to tell us what we shouldn't do. Don't spill your milk. Don't go out in the street. All right. We're all hypnotists. And when our parents tell us things like, don't spill our milk, we make a picture in our brain of spilling milk. And then we follow through with it. Same thing, we're in the yard playing and our parent comes out and says, don't go out in the street. We didn't think about going out in the street until they tell us. So we have a way of doing negations, don'ts, all right? The 10 Commandments, all right? Out of the 10 Commandments, 8 of them have negations. Do not do this. Do not do that. They don't tell you what to do, but they tell you what not to do. So our society basically is a going away from rather than telling us what to do or what we want, all right? You talk to a man on the street that's homeless and you ask him, what do you want? And he'd say, I don't want to be homeless. And you ask the question again, they'll give you the same answer. They won't say, I want to have a home or I want to have a job. Their brain is directed away from. A simple way of looking at this is if you say to yourself, I want to live, notice the pictures that you make in your mind's eye. Make a picture of, I don't want to die. Big difference. All right. Clearly, I don't want to die. You go back to I want to live. All right. And in therapy, talk therapy, what I find talking to therapists over the last 40 years, most of the time they have their clients in today in virtual reality on Zoom, but before in their office. And they would listen to their client for their 45 minutes. And success is how good the therapist was in human relations, making the person feel good. As far as making the change, very seldom does it happen. I once read a gentleman's statement on where we are in therapy today. And he made a comment that, well, your car is smoking, all right, it's making all kinds of noise, it's shaking, and you go to an automobile repair place, and the manager comes out and says, well, we're going to have to see your car once a week, all right, to establish a relationship. And after years, 30 to 50% drop out, and some of them are better, and some of them are a lot worse than when they start. So I look at, if I'm going to a therapist, I want to know how long it's going to take to change what I'm working on, all right, and what procedures they're going to use to do this. Today, the most common procedure, practice, modality is called cognitive-based therapy. Well, us human beings are not logical creatures. We're an emotional creature. So yes, you can change an emotion sometimes by a different way of thinking. But most of the time, the emotion will come back because you got to think. And we react rather than think. It's like learning how to go into an anger workshop. Well, it might work fine in the workshop, but once you walk out and you get in the state, it's too late when you're in it to count to 10. You're past that point. So I look at procedures that will actually change things. In 1984, I had been going through 12 years of traumatic PTSD flashbacks. I was an air traffic controller from 1967 until 2004. In 1972, I witnessed an airplane crash 2,000 feet away from me, a DC-9, which is a two-engine jet, with 3 people aboard that I had met the day before. They were on a training flight. Anyway, they got into a bad situation. They hit the runway, started cartwheeling on their wings, blew up right in front of me. And I was supposed to go out with one of the guys with my wife and his wife for dinner that night. For 12 years, I did these flashbacks all the time, sometimes just, 3 or 4 times a day. And by chance, I was looking different ways of, I had gone to a therapist. I had gotten no help. In fact, one therapist used what they called back then flooding. In other words, going through the experience and going through the experience, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, expecting different results from doing the same thing. When it didn't work. And I happened across a thing called Neuro-Linguistics Program, NLP. And by chance, that weekend, like 3 days before, I see that they're having a workshop. And I go to the workshop for 2 days. And on the second day, they asked me to volunteer for this Nlp Trauma Cure. I volunteered. Anyway, I could tell you about it right now if you'd like to know how the procedure works. Okay, here's how it worked. The therapist told me, all right, imagine, Clint, you walk into a movie theater and you find a seat. You sit down, you're the only person there. And you look up on the screen, and just a blank screen. And what I want you to do is put a black and white snapshot of something you do every day, like put on your shoes, comb your hair, whatever. Just a black and white snapshot. And as you're sitting in that chair, you can feel the weight of your body in the chair. And you can smell the smells in the room. You can feel the temperature in the room. And you just look up there and you can see that black and white snapshot. Now what I want you to do is I want you to pretend you float out of your body and you float up to the projection booth. There you're in the projection booth and you can see through this plexiglass that there's you sitting there in the movie theater looking at this black and white snapshot. Now, this plexiglass has holes in it so you can hear. And I want you to keep a hand on that plexiglass. Feel that plexiglass. Notice the temperature of it, the smoothness of it. Because in a minute, we're going to start a movie. This movie is going to be in black and white of this trauma that you want to deal with. It's going to start before the trauma. All right. And you're going to have control of speeding the movie up or slowing it down. And what we're going to do is start it before the trauma, and we're going to go through the trauma all the way to where you're safe. And when you're safe, we will freeze the movie, just like a DVD or watching a movie on TV. So 1, 2, 3, the movie starts. It's in black and white. So you're okay, and then the bad thing starts to happen. And you see your younger self going through it as you're watching yourself in the movie theater watch this movie. Your hand's still up there. And as we continue on, you can make it go faster. And in your own mind, go ahead and make it go faster till it's the end and freeze frame it. You survived it. And now I'm going to count to 3. And what you're going to do is you're going to go back to the movie theater to where you're sitting in that chair, and you're going to immediately float in that screen to your younger self. And the movie is going to become color, living color, with all the sounds and feelings. But you're going to run it backwards real fast and then forward. So here we're going to do it. 1, 2, 3. Come down to your seat, float into the theater, and running it backwards, all the sounds and feelings and living color. Zip, running it forward, zip, running it backwards, zip, zip, forward, zip, back, zip, 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 zip. And now they ask me, well, Clint, think about that accident now. It was completely different. It wasn't as vivid. I didn't have the feelings I had. And that was the end of my flashbacks after 12 years.
Wow.
I ended up going through a lot of training. I was especially intrigued with Milton Erikson, world's foremost hypnotherapist, and attended all types of different workshops. In 1993, a therapist in Houston attended a workshop given by a New Zealander by the name of David Grove. And she said that a lot of my work was similar in our language patterns. And she had the workbook and 8 cassette tapes. And anyway, I studied this and got in contact with David in Missouri, and found out, how he was doing this. He was called Healing the Wounded Child Within, using metaphors. And I started using this clean language in 93. And here we are today in 2022. And I found it to be the most effective, eloquent therapy model in existence today. And it's so surprising that what happened is David ended up going to the UK around 1996 and became famous over there, especially in the field of coaching. And but not in therapy. And in the United States, I found 2 people that are using clean language for therapy. And what I did was I joined LinkedIn, trying to get the word out to therapists. I think I have 3,600 therapists following me now since February this year.
Would you like to grow your practice but don't know where to start? We're now giving away Therapists to Millions for free. Correct. You can learn how to write a best-selling book, how to get yourself a TEDx talk, how to use PLR products, how to set up a podcast, and lots more, and it's all completely free. Head over to therapisttomillions.com and sign up now.
Clean language. What is clean language? Well, David came up with the word clean language. It was a way to describe this therapy modality in that the therapist stays out of it, stays clean, all right? The client is the one that does the work. The only thing that the therapist is doing is listening, keeping their opinions and advice to themselves, asking clean questions. And there's about 9 different clean questions. And the questions are basically to cause movement in the psychic. All right. Like what happens next? And then what happens? In developing the feeling, it's like, and whereabouts is the feeling? Does it have a shape or a size? What's it like? What would you like to have happen? All right, these are all clean questions. And amazingly, the client solves their problem, not the therapist. So at the end of the therapy session, the hero of the session was the client, and normally the younger client of the child within. Now, in about 2008, I came up with a modification of this therapy model, and I call it Back to the Future. And just like in the movie, what I do is I have the client on the emotional state that they're working on, have them go back in time before they ever had this emotion. And then I have them go back in time to a time they had peace, which is a whole big subject, by the way, that emotion of peace. And with peace, I have them get a resource that they didn't have that would make a difference for this trauma. So it's like if there was a hurricane about to hit the UK and you had a fairly new house, would you want to put storm shutters on the house during the hurricane or before the hurricane? All right. So what we're doing is we're putting the resources before the trauma, which makes the trauma a non-event. So the client, two things happen. One is they don't go through the trauma. And two, most of the time, they don't know what the trauma was. So they don't have to deal with the after effect. You know, you've gone through it once. Maybe you have, you know, really put it down deep in your subconscious. Why in the world should we expose it? All right. All you want is the healing from it.
So can you tell us about your spotty approach then? Because we were talking about that before. It sounds fascinating.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to talk about free spotting. We as human beings, when we're children, we're taught to stay away from pain. All right. We avoid pain at all costs. As we grow up, we continue doing this. We find all kinds of ways to avoid pain. Alcohol, drugs, food, sex, TV, movies, escapism, workaholism, all right? And by doing this, we continue having the same emotions. I found back, in 1984, working on my own trauma, that to avoid an emotional state means you're going to keep it. And it's going to be on the surface, and you're going to waste a lot of energy and create a lot of behaviors, bad behaviors doing this stuff. So over the years, I've always gone for procedures that change the emotion, not cope, but actually change. A few years ago, I saw a YouTube video made by a lady therapist in the Philippines by the name of Fiona DeVos. And she calls this new technique free spotting. And it is simple as having a pen, looking at the tip of the pen, or putting a dot on your thumb or finger and putting it out here, or putting a spot on the wall. And the secret is whatever limiting belief you have or whatever emotion you have, just stare at that spot while you're processing. What will happen? In fact, Damon, think of something that you don't have to even talk about it, but think about an emotional state you'd like to see gone, maybe forever.
Okay.
And put your thumb out or finger out in front of you and just look at that and get that feeling. Notice where it's located in your body. And notice on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you scale this out? 10 being worse and 1 being neutral.
That's 6.
Okay. Just keep on staring and keep on feeling. And notice how the feeling just kind of melts away as you keep on concentrating on that feeling, staring at your finger, that spot on your finger.
Yeah, you can't focus on 2 different things at the same time, can you?
That's how the brain works. That's right. That's why it works.
That's amazing.
What number would you give it now?
4.
Keep on staring. And would you like it to be a 1?
Go on then.
Would you like it to be a 1 or a 0?
Yep.
What is it now?
2. 1. Go on.
Okay, so I will break state and just distract your mind with something else. How many kilometers do you have on your automobile?
45,000.
Okay, that emotional state you were just working on, see if you can get it back.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Well, it's also scary to a lot of people. I have a lot of people almost freak out, like, they think I'm Jesus. Well, I'm not. I'm Clint Matheny. I'm just a guy. All right. And I didn't come up with this either. And really, all the really effective therapy procedures have this one thing in common. It's a focus on something while you are experiencing the emotion. It could be EMDR, following a finger or a wand. It could be a thing called brain spotting, which is just looking out at a different location, all right? Or it could be something like the movie theater I just had you experience. You experienced that because I was talking about it.
Yeah, I was thinking it through myself, yeah.
Sure, everybody that's watching this is doing that. And I would hope that everybody who's watching this is not driving an automobile.
This is available on YouTube as well if anyone's listening on Spotify.
Okay. All right. But all the effective therapy procedures working on trauma always have this one thing in common, is that you are doing something different than what you have been doing when you've been re-experiencing this traumatic event. That's all it is. When I first started therapy, I had this Nlp Trauma Cure, and I was doing fear of flying. All right. I had a lot of clients, and I only had this one procedure, so I had to come up with something different if just this one didn't work, because not everything works. All right. So I came up with people jumping up and down on one foot and then switching to the other foot while they were thinking about their fear of getting on an airplane. All right. It worked. I also had people go an inch above their navel, tighten their stomach muscles, and with this finger here, pound on their stomach while they're thinking about it. All right. And after 2 or 3 minutes, I tell them to stop, and I ask them to think about what their problem was. And the only thing they would feel was pounding on their stomach, which had a different meaning. The emotion was no longer there.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that.
So anyway, I always, when I'm doing therapy, I always teach people therapy procedures that they can use on themselves that they just don't have to use with me in their context.
So using hypotheticals and no names, what's been your biggest success story, would you say?
Well, I put one on my blog. It's a woman. It's a 29-year follow-up on major depression. And the session took, I don't know, about 10 minutes. And it was a clean language therapy session. And she had a metaphor of a dark black cloud. And I also after I did that, a week later, I did another follow-up with a lady that had severe depression and disassociation. It was a 16-year follow-up. It was clean language also. Those are pretty significant. But one of the most heartfelt for me, my uncle was in World War II at Iwo Jima. And as a kid growing up, I always heard stories about my aunt and him never slept in the same room because he almost killed her the first night home after the war. He relived a trauma on the island. And anyway, he almost choked her to death. So they never slept in the same bedroom again. And never had another child. They had a child before the war. And 15 years later, I was visiting one day, and my uncle had just had open heart surgery and wanted to do an exercise walk. And my aunt said, you know, would you talk to, he's deceased, his name was Red, about getting help from the VA. And I said, what kind of help? And she said, well, you know, we haven't been in the same bedroom since, 1945 in October. And it would be nice before I died be able to sleep with him. So I said, well, it's a pretty sensitive subject. If it comes up, I'll mention it. Well, anyway, it came up about 15 minutes later. We walked by a house where a man had committed suicide 2 days before, a World War II veteran. And I asked my uncle, do you know any reason why he did that? And he said he was like a lot of us World War II veterans. We went off to the war, and when we came back, we forgot we had a childhood. And right then I said, Red, well, why don't you seek help from the VA? See a therapist. And he just exploded. And he was only a few inches away from my face, and his face was red, and his blood vessels were popping, and he was spitting in my face, screaming, I should have died that blank night. I should have died. And I said, well, if you can feel your feet on the ground right now, you are alive, and you have a responsibility to your wife. You're okay. And all the guys that died that night would have been dead today anyway from old age. And he just stared at me. And I said, let's go walking. And anyway, we walked about a half mile, went back to his house, and he walked right in. My aunt came out and says, is Red okay? And I said, well, I don't know. We had a discussion. I'm leaving. So 6 months later, my aunt's in the hospital with cancer. And she said, I really appreciate what you did for Red. And I said, well, I didn't really do anything. And she says, oh, yes, you did. He took the padlock off his bedroom door when he walked in and says, I'm getting my clothes out and I'm locking the door. And I'll never go in this bedroom again. And I said, well, what happened? And she says, next morning, I was alive. And I said, how was your night, Red? And he said, fine. She says, I'd ask him that every night, every morning. And he was always fine. And he never relived that trauma again. That was one of my, and I didn't even know I was doing therapy.
Wow. That's awesome. Now, if you could write a book, what would the title be?
You got to be shitting me.
That is so good. I like that. Brilliant. So on the subject of books, what's been the best therapy book you've ever read and why?
Oh, God. Boy, there's My Voice Will Go With Me, Erikson, Milton Erikson, Heart of the Mind, Connirae and Steve Andreas. Steve Andreas's book on self-concept. There's a lady that does workshops and has written a book. And just a second, I'll tell you. This is off my recommended reading list. And do a search on YouTube for a clean language, and also on Google. There's a lot of information, mostly coming from the UK. One book I would strongly recommend is the book that I wanted to say about Steve Andreas. It's called Transforming Yourself. And a book on emotions is called The Emotional Hostage by Leslie Cameron-Bandler. If you can find a David Grove book, Grove, on metaphor, if you're a therapist, resolving traumatic memories, metaphors, and symbols in psychotherapy.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you. And finally, what's well, not finally, because we've got our competition question coming up, but what is your top tip for mental health in the world today?
We all have a brain. All right. Unfortunately, we don't have a user's manual. That's the problem. All right. Talking about, it's like if I was going to all right, change a tire. All right. Basically, a psychologist would talk about, well, why did you get the nail in the tire? Isn't it a shame you have a nail in the tire? Let's talk about it. In fact, let's do group therapy. We have other people that have nails in their tires too, and we can all, have greater understanding, and and being in a group with people that have common problems. No solutions, but we can talk about it. All right. Now, if I was going to a therapist, I would go to a therapist that would teach me how to get a nail out of a tire rather than talking about it. And this morning, I had sent a link to my blog on the Link Insight, and the lady psychologist professor says, "I'm not a therapist. I don't need any of this information." I just responded, "It's just information, lady. You take it or leave it." But I thought, how old are you? I mean, when did you lose your curiosity? I mean, you're a professor. I would hope that you could learn something. I mean, I suggested on my blog, have you ever seen the BBC series called 7 Ups? Have you ever seen that?
I haven't, but I know it. Yeah.
Okay. And she said, I don't care to see it. So anyway, there are a lot of people out there that go into psychotherapy that learn one therapy modality. It's normally from their supervisor. And 50 years later, they're still doing the same old thing. However, it does work in certain respects. One is it provides a good living. All right. If you can keep someone in therapy for years, you're making good money. And unfortunately, that's how some people see it. But there are a lot of people, a lot of caring therapists out there that do good work. But there are some people that just drag therapy out just for the pocketbook. That's what upsets me.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so finally, to win a T-shirt, tell us a fact that blows our mind or tell us a joke that's one of a kind.
25% of the population worldwide suffers depression in a yearly. Some people are in it all the time. I have met people that have been in depression for 40, 50 years. Mm-hmm. And looking at a end of a pen for a minute or two, and it's gone. I mean,
that was brilliant. That was absolutely brilliant. I loved that. That was so good. Clint, if people want to get hold of you, what's the best way to do it?
The only thing I wanted was my blog to get out there. People get self-help. I just want to make the world a little bit better than where I leave it.
Fantastic. We're going to share the details of your blog, and I've been having a look at it. It's lovely. It's a really, really well-written blog as well. So thank you so much for taking part in today's show and for your insights into really a couple of fantastic approaches, which is that there's a live demonstration in this show. If you got to the end of it and you've skipped any of it, go back and listen, because there's an amazing bit where Clint works on me. It's really effective. So thank you so much for taking part, and we really appreciate your input.
My pleasure. Thank you, Dan.